Good evening. I guess I could start. Good evening, my name's Councillor Helen Green. I'd like to welcome members of the public, colleagues and officers to this meeting. I'm chairing tonight's meeting, and to manage the business as efficiently as possible, I invite people to speak one at a time to ensure their contributions are properly heard. Therefore, please do not speak unless invited to do so by me. Thank you in advance. The fire evacuation procedure. On hearing the fire alarm, please leave the building immediately using the nearest available exit. Do not, under any circumstances, use the lift. The assembly point is in the area in the Civic Office car park next to the roundabout, and you should not attempt to re-enter the building unless
I believe they're bringing up the members of the public, and there are lots of them. If you carry on doing the fire bit, you'll probably have to do it again. And they're the ones who need it.
I'm not... Well, given that it's 6 o'clock and that's when it starts, that's when I started it. So we can wait for the public to arrive if you like, and then I'll do all this again, but they should really be here on time. Anyway,
they've been waiting.
If they're all waiting downstairs, then we will wait for them. Okay, and then I'll start again. Thanks. Thank you very much. Good evening. My name is Councillor Helen Green, and I'd like to welcome members of the public, colleagues and officers to this meeting. I'm chairing tonight's meeting, and to manage business as efficiently as possible, I'll invite people to speak one at a time to ensure their contributions are properly heard. And therefore, please do not speak unless invited to do so by me. Thank you in advance. The fire evacuation procedure. On hearing the fire alarm, please leave the building immediately using the nearest available exit. Do not under any circumstances use the lift. The assembly point is in the area in the civic car park next to the roundabout, and you should not attempt to re-enter the building until it's safe to do so. Please also, may I ask you to switch your mobile phones off or on silent. Thank you. So members of the committee, visiting members and members of the public, please be aware that our planning committee meetings are always webcast live, and so any contribution you make will be broadcast. Please remember to use your microphone when speaking and to turn it off when you have finished. This is very important for the webcast because the camera moves to the next speaker, and you need only press the black button once each time to turn it on or off. Thank you. So item 1 is membership. I have Councillor Alexander substituting for Councillor Amron and Councillor Quilty substituting for Councillor Sussman. Item 2, communication. Please note, as set out in your update sheet, due to the need for additional information identified by members during the planning technical meeting and some outstanding technical matters in relation to flooding and highways, agenda item 5A 24/0442/FUL, land south of Allum Lane, Elstree, has been withdrawn from this committee with the agreement of the applicant. Members, we record our vote, and when requested, we do this with general members first. Then members representing the wards the application is in, and I vote last and exercise an additional casting vote if it's required. Visiting members and community advocates, thank you for being present here. Please make sure you alert us when you leave or re-enter the meeting so a minute can be made for the records. So officers have tabled papers detailing additional information that have been received in relation to the application to be considered tonight. Copies have been circulated to all members and members of the public present. Do all committee members have a copy? Yes. Thank you. And I have apologies from Councillor Sussman and Councillor Amron. Item 3, our declaration of interest. Do any members have an interest to declare in connection with this evening's agenda? Good. Item 4 are the minutes. The minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of January 2026 are included in the agenda papers. Can these be confirmed as a true record and signed afterwards?
Madam Chair, if I may.
Councillor Brisky, yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In relation to application 240748 FUL from the previous meeting, my vote has been recorded as against. I believe I abstained on this particular application. I think I wasn't the only one. I think Councillor Clapper, maybe Councillor Sussman might have abstained on it as well, but we're all recorded as voting against. I'd be grateful if officers could kindly correct the record.
Thank you very much. We will go ahead and make that alteration. Thank you. So item 5 is the planning application. So as papers for this meeting were published and provided to members of the committee 5 working days in advance, and a meeting was held to enable members to clarify a technical point, and that meeting was held prior to this meeting, I'll proceed on the basis that members are well informed about the application before us. I note that Councillor Allen was not able to attend the technical, and Councillor Quilty wasn't, as he wasn't at that point on the committee. And also Councillor Alexander left early. So I will, though, carry on as if it is okay with you three, yes, and that you will be able to ask your questions accordingly. Thank you. For each application, it's custom and practice at Hertsmere for a member of the public to be permitted to speak against an application and a member to speak in support of it. And where there are two speakers for an application, the person wishing to speak against speaks first. Councillors who are not members of the committee may also speak in their role as a community advocate or on behalf of residents if they've registered to. And I have Councillor Bright here tonight who will speak on item 5B/25/1347 FUL. Members, may I remind you that requests to amend or defer or refuse an application must make clear the material planning consideration for the minutes. So, as I said earlier, 5A has been withdrawn due to additional information being required. So we'll go on to item 5B, which is 25/1347/FUL, land adjacent and to the rear of 52 Harris Lane. And I invite Georgia O'Brien to present. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this application relates to land adjacent and to the rear of number 52 Harris Lane, Shenley. The description of development is the erection of 38 dwellings, including 50% affordable homes, with associated parking, infrastructure, landscaping and open space, and access from Harris Lane. And this is an application for full planning permission. It's not an outline application. Just a small number of updates for members since publication of the report. Just to draw your attention to a typo, which is at paragraph 733. The number of affordable homes was put as 24. It's just a mistake. It's 19. And at paragraph 7115, it states that there are no habitable room windows on the rear elevations of the apartment buildings. It's just to point out that there are kitchen windows on the facing the northern boundary, and we have received an additional 2 neighbour objections. Those objections haven't raised any material planning considerations that haven't already been addressed in the report. So this is the site location plan with the site outlined in red. As you can see, it's on the edge of the settlement of Shenley, adjacent to number 52 Harris Lane and opposite Harris Lane Park. This is to show you the site constraints. So the site is in the green belt. It is also located opposite Shenley Conservation Area, shown hatched on this plan, which the boundary of which is on the other side of Harris Lane. The Griswood and Tom's arboricultural business is located to the north, and there are 2 locally listed buildings to the south. And just to point out the adjacent road, residential streets there of Anderson Road and Newcombe Road. The nearest public rights-of-way are a short distance to the south. That's public rights-of-way 18 and 19. And moving on to some site photos. So this is the field gate to the site, the existing field gate, and this is the approximate location of where the new vehicular access would be located onto the development. And then looking north from approximately that location, you can see the Griswood and Tom's business on the other side of some landscaping. And then moving into the site, this is a view from that field gate that I showed you, looking southeast across the site and into the open countryside beyond. And this is the side elevation of number 52 Harris Lane. The red line boundary runs alongside that side boundary of that property. And these are some outbuildings within the site that would be removed. They currently belong to number 52. And this is an existing chicken coop which would also be removed. So to show you some of the soft landscaping along the northern boundary, this is one of the most mature trees on the site which is to be retained adjacent to Griswood and Tom's. And this is a view looking southeast, further mature trees and hedgerow to be retained. And then again, looking further southeast towards High Cannons. This is one of the key views through the site, which was an important part of the appeal and which has been considered in the design of the scheme, as we'll go into some more detail later. So the site is bounded by existing residential dwellings on Anderson Road and Harris Lane. So this is looking Southwest, you can see the rear elevations of the dwellings on Anderson Road, and that black timber building there is an outbuilding in the rear garden of number 50 Harris Lane. And here's just another view of the rear elevations of those dwellings on Harris Lane, which are on the boundary with the site. So again, this is the approximate location of the new vehicular access point. Some of that hedgerow will need to be removed to accommodate that access road. And then looking west back towards Harris Lane, this grass verge that you can see here, bear with me just a second. This grass verge is proposed to be connected up to the pavement here. So there'll be a pavement that runs alongside and connects into the site for that pedestrian connectivity to the rest of Harris Lane. Here you can see where the vehicular access would be, and here is the pedestrian entrance to Harris Lane Park. So also as part of the development, it's proposed to install an informal road crossing approximately here, which will allow pedestrians to walk across the road and into the site and vice versa. And then stepping into Harris Lane Park from that pedestrian entrance, this is the view you would get across the road and into the site. This is a view looking west, the surrounding residential context. This is Harris Lane Park itself, which is in the conservation area. And then these are the existing properties on Harris Lane, which, again, you can see from within the conservation area above that hedge line. So the planning history for this site, members will recall that there was an outline planning application in 2022. This was refused at the time for being inappropriate development in the Greenbelt with no very special circumstances. And this was appealed by the applicant. This went to public inquiry, and the appeal was ultimately dismissed by the inspector at the time. And then in 2025, the council received a pre-application, which was then followed by this full planning application following advice from officers. The refused outline scheme, so this was based, well, it was assessed against the 2021 version of the MPPF, and this was prior to the introduction of grey belt policy. So in that case, all development in the Greenbelt was inappropriate unless it complied with one of the specified exceptions, and in that case it did not comply with any of the exceptions, so it was deemed to be inappropriate, and officers determined and members agreed that it was inappropriate development in the Greenbelt with no VSCs. So just to show you the refused outline scheme, it was an outline application, so these weren't approved plans, these were just illustrative plans setting out how the site could have been developed. Option 1 is quite markedly different to what's proposed now, option 2 a bit less so, but option 2 was still more urban in character than what's currently proposed. So the appeal scheme again was assessed against the 2021 version of the MPPF. Prior to grey belt policy, at that time, our housing land supply was 1.58 years. And the key issues at appeal were the effect on greenbelt openness and purposes, the effect on character and appearance of the area, noise impacts from gristwood and toms, and whether very special circumstances would arise. So during the course of the appeal, the noise impacts were resolved in consultation with environmental health, and a condition was agreed. So that was essentially eliminated as a reason for refusal when the appeal was considered. It essentially came down to the greenbelt harm. So I've just popped this on here to show you a side-by-side comparison of the appeal scheme and the scheme now proposed for the full planning permission. So the inspector's findings in his decision, he found that there was no conflict with greenbelt purposes A, B, D, or E, but he did find conflict with purpose C. He found moderate harm to the character and appearance of the area. Again, as I mentioned, the noise impacts were agreed, mitigated by a condition, but ultimately that greenbelt harm and other harm was not clearly outweighed. So that's the test, whether it was clearly outweighed by the benefits, so no VSCs. So what has changed since that appeal today? Firstly, this scheme is to be assessed against the 2024 MPPF, and this introduced grey belt policy. So it must be determined whether development is inappropriate, which now includes an assessment of whether a site is grey belt and whether it's inappropriate or not, applying the grey belt criteria. So again, the appeal scheme was considered in a different context, different policy context. Our housing land supply is down from 1.58 to 0.98 years. The 2024 MPPF also increased our housing targets. The scheme now proposed includes 50% affordable housing, where it was 40% previously. This is a result of the introduction of the Golden Rule, so that's a policy requirement. And compliance with the Golden Rules must be afforded significant weight in the planning balance. So obviously, that was not a factor in the planning balance at appeal, and now it must be considered in the balance. We've also since had the Longview appeal decision come through, which in that case, the inspector found that site was grey belt. This is a site in the green belt in Shenley, approximately 350 metres away from this site. And this is an application for full planning permission, so we have all of the details, all of the design details, all of the technical information, whereas before it was an outline scheme, so we were only considering development parameters and the principle. So we have more information now, and all technical matters have now been resolved, including noise. So to look again at the proposed site plan, I've just pointed out here where the affordable units would be located. As I mentioned before, that does equate to 50% of the total units to be affordable. And this is a story heights plan, so the maximum story height is 2.5 stories. So these are some proposed street scenes. This is street scene AA, so I've shown on the top there is the view from Harris Lane, looking onto the development with the hedgerow, and then the bottom is how you would see the development behind the hedgerow. Obviously, that hedgerow shown at the top would be retained, so the top view is the view you would essentially get from Harris Lane and within the park as well. Street scene BB, shown on the key plan, it's looking south at plots 2, 3 and 4 and plot 5. Street scene BB2, so this is again looking south but further into the site. You can get an appreciation of the changing ground levels as the site slopes away from the road towards the rear. This is street scene CC, and this is looking north at that northern boundary. So all of these properties are located against that northern boundary with Gristwood and Toms. And street scene DD, which shows you the rear of the development looking back up towards Harris Lane with 9 and 10 Anderson Road there on the left and the application site on the right. So these are some detailed elevations just to show you the variety of house types and material palette proposed, the 2 and 2.5 story dwellings, and some detailed elevations of the 2.5 story apartment buildings on the northern boundary. I've included the rear elevations there just to show members how the fenestration has been treated, with the majority of habitable room windows located on the front elevation facing towards the public open space and away from that noise source. As I mentioned before, there are some kitchen windows on the rear elevation, but otherwise these are non-habitable room windows. Some detailed elevations of the Mews apartments and the Masonettes. These are also on the northern boundary. And again, the rear elevation of the on the bottom right there is showing the windows to be facing towards that noise on Gristwood and Toms. So the principle of development, looking at paragraph 11D, as this is a greenbelt site, we're looking at 11D1 because this has regard to areas and assets of particular importance, which includes greenbelt, heritage assets, sites at flood risk, etc. And MPPF 11D2 will become applicable if the development is deemed to be not inappropriate. So to determine whether or not the scheme is inappropriate development, MPPF paragraph 155 covers this. It says the development of homes, commercial and other development in the greenbelt should not be regarded as inappropriate where all of the following apply. So the development has to comply with all 4 of these requirements. It would utilise grey-belt land and would not fundamentally undermine the purposes taken together of the remaining green belts. There is a demonstrable unmet need for the type of development proposed. It would be in a sustainable location, and it would comply with the golden rules where applicable. It is applicable in this case, as we're looking at a residential development. So looking at first, is the site grey belt? So the NPPF glossary defines grey belt, and it states that grey belt is defined as land in the green belt comprising previously developed land and or any other land that in either case does not strongly contribute to any of purposes A, B, or D. Excludes land where the application of policies relating to areas or assets in footnote 7 other than green belt would provide a strong reason for refusing or restricting development. So shown there, paragraph 143, this sets out the purposes of the green belt, and their A, B, and D are relevant to determining whether a site is grey belt. So purpose A, this table is taken from the PPG, and it gives us an illustrative criteria to apply to development sites to determine whether they make a strong, moderate, or weak contribution to this purpose. So this is to check the unrestricted sprawl of large built-up areas, and it explicitly says that villages should not be considered large built-up areas. So that's the starting point here. Shenley is, of course, a village, and therefore cannot be considered a large built-up area. The development in officer's view would not result in an incongruous pattern of development. It's also relevant that the Harris Lane inspector, when looking at the greenbelt purposes, which have not changed, he stated that in particular, Shenley does not comprise a large built-up area, so it follows that the proposal would not prejudice purpose A to check the unrestricted sprawl of large built-up areas. And similarly, the Longview appeal inspector, in this case making his decision against grey belt policy, he determined that Shenley is neither a large built-up area nor a historic town, so the site cannot make a strong contribution to purposes A or D. So it's evident that two inspectors have determined that Shenley is not a large built-up area and it cannot therefore make a strong contribution to this purpose. Purpose B is to prevent neighbouring towns merging into one another. Again, just underneath that, it says this purpose relates to the merging of towns, not villages. So Shenley, being a village, cannot make a strong contribution here unless it was in a location or it was such a scale that it would result in the merging of towns. In this case, the development site is small in scale compared to the distance it sits in between neighbouring towns to the north, south, east, and west. It doesn't form a substantial gap between these towns, and it wouldn't result in the loss of visual separation of towns. And again, the Harris Lane appeal inspector did not find conflict with this purpose. Purpose D is to preserve the setting and special character of historic towns. Once again, Shenley is not a historic town. It doesn't contribute to the setting of a historic town or the special character of a historic town. And the Harris Lane appeal inspector again stated, there would be no harm to heritage assets, nor does this form part of the council's case. Thus, I find no conflict with purpose D to preserve the setting and special character of historic towns. So as set out, clearly there's no conflict, there's no strong contribution to purposes A, B, or D in this case. So are any footnote 7 policies applicable? I've put footnote 7 here. It lists all of the relevant criteria, none of which are applicable with the exception of heritage assets and flood, and neither of which have been identified as strong reasons for refusal. There's no harm to heritage assets and there's no increased flood risk. The LLFA have confirmed no objection. So there are no footnote 7 policies that would provide a strong reason for refusal. And then the other question, would it fundamentally undermine the Greenbelt purposes? So the development would have to fundamentally undermine the purposes, all of those purposes, of the remaining Greenbelt across the area of the plan. So this is the area of the plan, this is Hertsmere Borough, and you can see that we are a Greenbelt borough with the exception of our towns, which are inset. And that red dot illustrates the location of the application site. So clearly the development of that site is not going to fundamentally undermine the performance of the Greenbelt as a borough. And there's no conflict with purposes A, B, or D. There is conflict with Purpose C. There would be a slight encroachment into the countryside, as was acknowledged by the inspector. But ultimately, that factor does not, as a whole, fundamentally undermine the purposes of the Greenbelt. So is there a demonstrable unmet need? MPPF footnote 56 says that in the case of applications involving the provision of housing, this means the lack of a 5-year supply of deliverable housing sites. Our current 5-year housing supply is 0.98 years, and the housing delivery tests have been below 75% also. The Longview inspector has stated in his appeal decision that housing need is particularly pressing in Hertsmere. The council and the appellants agreed that the current supply of deliverable housing sites is just 0.98 years. The shortfall against the framework's requirement for 5 years is one of the largest for English local planning authorities. Moreover, the delivery of housing in recent years has been well below what is needed. The most recent housing delivery test result is just 46%. Is the site in a sustainable location? The question of sustainable location was not a reason for refusal of the outline scheme. For the Longview appeal, it was also agreed that that site was in a sustainable location. Again, that's 350 metres away, also located in Shenley. And there are a number of local services available in Shenley within walking distance as set out here. There are bus stops available, although it is acknowledged that these are limited, with the 357 being an hourly service. But this notwithstanding, also Shenley Grange was approved for 95 homes. This was also agreed as being in a sustainable location. So it has been agreed that Shenley is a sustainable location on 2 recent planning decisions. And then finally, the golden rules. This is set out at paragraph 156 of the MPPF. And this states that where major development involving the provision of housing is proposed on land released from the Greenbelt through plan review or on sites in the Greenbelt subject to a planning application, such as here, the following contributions should be made. So that's affordable housing. The requirement in Hertsmere that we have to apply in this case is 50%. Necessary improvements to local or national infrastructure, and the provision of new or improvements to existing green spaces that are accessible to the public, and these must be high quality and within walking distance of homes. So the scheme does propose 50% affordable housing. The tenure mix has been agreed with the housing team, as set out in these tables here, which includes family homes, and these are secured by the Section 106 agreement, which is currently in draft. Necessary improvements to infrastructure. So the application will include, again, secured by Section 106, a financial contribution to our cycle hire scheme of £23,750, a contribution to Harris Lane Park and Playing Fields improvements of £125,000, an informal pedestrian crossing on Harris Lane, with a total Section 106 financial contributions coming to £153,750. And that's in comparison with Longview, which was larger than this scheme. This is about 1/3 of the size, and their contributions were £116,000. The SIL liability, Community Infrastructure Levy liability, is also £851,000. So it's a total of just over £1 million to local infrastructure. The provision of new or improvements to existing green spaces, so the on-site public open space will be accessible to those in the development as well as within the wider community of Shenley, and this occupies about 25% of the site. It's within walking distance of majority of dwellings in the village, and the landscaping is considered to be of a high quality with play on the way and seating as well. So the Greenbelt conclusion, we've gone through whether or not the site is grey belt and whether or not it meets the requirements at paragraph 155. So officers are of the view that the site does meet the definition of grey belts. It's fully compliant with MPPF 156, which includes affordable housing, infrastructure, and public open space. There's also full compliance with the golden rules, and in that case, significant weight should be included in favour of the grant of permission. So ultimately, due to compliance with all of these factors, the MPPF mandates that you must conclude that the development is not inappropriate. And this assessment has been looked at by both the applicants and the council's barristers, and their legal advice is that the officer judgment on the green belt assessment and the grey belt assessment is robust and sound. So turning to landscape impacts, the plan here on the top left is a design parameters plan, and as you can see here, this view through the site was a key design consideration, trying to retain that key view from the existing field gate into the open countryside beyond. And therefore, the design of the scheme has sought to retain that view, albeit it will be framed by built form. But ultimately, when viewing the site from Harris Lane, there will be a gap in built form that will allow, due to the drop in land levels across the site and into the countryside. The site has a moderate high sensitivity to low density residential development. It is acknowledged that it would be visible from the central sections of public rights of way 18 and 19 to the southeast, and that the upper floors of development, as shown there, would be visible from Harris Lane and the park, which is in the conservation area. But retaining that view through the site was a key design consideration that was acknowledged by Place Services, and that some open views through the site to the open countryside would remain. Ultimately, Place Services identified there would be some harm to landscape character, and this has been considered in the planning balance, but they did recommend some conditions which are also attached. In terms of heritage and archaeology, again, the site is located within the setting of Shenley Conservation Area. This was assessed by Place Services, and they've determined that there would not be harm to the setting of the conservation area or the nearby listed buildings. And similarly, HCC Archaeology have not raised any objections, and they've recommended some conditions which we've also attached. So turning to character and appearance, the Shenley Neighbourhood Plan is a key consideration, both the plan itself and the design principles and code, also together with the MPPF and our own development plan policies, which strive for a high quality design. So policy SH1 relates to rural character, and it states that development within the greenbelt areas of the neighbourhood plan will be expected to ensure that the design of the development relates positively to its surroundings and enhances the existing distinctiveness of the rural character of Shenley by reflecting the special and valued features that are unique to the locality, the heritage assets and architectural features that contribute to that local character. It also states that development proposals in the Greenbelt should have regard to the Shenley Parish Design Principles and Code. So the applicant's development has had regard to the Design Principles and Code, and I will go through them over the next slides. This is a sketch plan, just to show you how the development would look within the context of the neighbouring residential development and within a landscape setting. So looking first at the design code, SC1 of the design code requires that development should protect and enhance the rural character, respond positively to and enhance the rural character of listed buildings and spaces in the conservation area. Officers have determined, as set out in the report, that there is a partial compliance with SC1 of the design code. We've determined partial compliance primarily because the scheme does include buildings with crown roofs, which are not considered to be appropriate in a rural setting and in the setting of the historic conservation area, hence the partial compliance. SC2 states that the design and access statement should include an analysis of design principles, which the applicant has done, so that it complies with that requirement. SC3 says no linear plots of equal size typical of suburban development, a range of well-designed and attractive public spaces are welcomed and a positive response to the site context. So officers are satisfied that the design of the scheme is not suburban in character, it is an informal layout. There are a range of plot sizes, a range of orientations, and an informal road layout, shared surfaces, etc. SC4 requires a simple, restrained, and refined building detailing with reference to listed buildings. And again, we've determined a partial compliance here as a result of the larger bulk and scale of the buildings along the northern boundary and the crown roofs of the apartment buildings. But otherwise, the remaining buildings across the development would comply with SC4. SC5 states that buildings at important corners could have a greater mass and height to signify their importance. Using and maximising the space in roofs through creative design solutions are allowable if these are restrained and modest. And again, we've determined a partial compliance here because there are some roof spaces across the development that would be utilised as habitable with dormers and roof lights, but ultimately crown roofs are acknowledged as not being welcome by the neighbourhood plan. SC6 of the neighbourhood plan talks about boundaries and edges. It states preference for informal and natural landscaping, low-level engineered materials, planting typical of cottage or kitchen gardens, a simple palette of few materials and shared surfaces. So the proposed public open space creates a landscaped open buffer to the countryside as shown here. The distance from the nearest residential dwelling to the open countryside is 33 metres, which is in excess of the 10 metres recommended by the neighbourhood plan. As I mentioned before, much of the development would be finished in an unadopted and shared surface material. The landscaping would be naturalistic with meadow grass, natural shrub and orchard trees. And I've put up there a key showing some of the proposed boundary treatments. These include 0.9 metre picket fences, 0.9 metre and 1.2 metre black estate railings with hedgerow, brick walls and other timber fences. And these are considered on the whole to comply with SC6. SC7 and SC8, these refer to landscaping and express preference for opportunities for greening, attractive, resilient places that can help manage surface water, informality of rural streets, edges and gardens. And then SC8 talks about the retention of high-quality trees and hedgerow, and if removal is required, it does advocate for replacement of those trees and hedgerow. So I've just showed an excerpt here of the soft landscaping and public open space. This here is a suds basin, which is integrated into the open space and will be soft landscaped with appropriate aquatic planting. On the whole, we consider that the scheme is compliant with policies SC7 and SC8 of the design code. So turning to residential amenity, these are some separation distances shown to the nearby residential dwellings. These are, on the whole, in excess of requirements in compliance with Part D, with the exception of Plot 8, which is closer at ground floor than is required. Part D prefers a separation distance of 28 metres, which is retained at first floor level, but not at ground floor level. So we measure this to be 22.3 metres. So there is some limited harm to the amenity of this dwelling, number 48, which has been carried through into the planning balance. So in terms of amenity for future residents, all of the proposed dwellings meet the nationally described space standards. All of the gardens meet or exceed the required garden space requirements, and all dwellings would benefit from suitable outlook and natural light. Noise impacts, these have been considered at length in the determination of this application. An acoustic fence is proposed along the northern boundary. So this red dashed outline shows the location and the height of that fence. It would be located behind hedgerow planting along the northern boundary. Habitable room windows have been avoided wherever possible, and these would be primarily front-facing, with the exception of kitchen windows, as mentioned earlier. The applicant did carry out a noise impact assessment, and this was subject to consultation with environmental health, who ultimately have not raised any objections subject to conditions, and this reflects the position that was achieved at appeal stage. In terms of affordable housing, again, 50% affordable housing, which includes 19 total, that's 9 social rent and 10 shared ownership, which includes 3 and 4 bedroom homes. These were particularly desirable to our housing team. So the mix has been agreed with our housing team and again secured in the 106. Transport and highways, MPPF 116 states that development should only be prevented or refused on highways grounds if there would be an unacceptable impact on highway safety, or the residual cumulative impacts on the road network following mitigation would be severe, taking into account all future reasonable scenarios. So the applicant's assessment has determined the AM and PM peak movements as 22 two-way trips in the morning and 19 two-way trips in the evening. This movement was not disputed by HCC, was deemed to be appropriate. A new vehicular access junction from Harris Lane is proposed, and this junction was subjected to a stage 1 road safety audit. An informal crossing, as mentioned as well, is also proposed. So National Highways and HCC Highways have not raised any objections, subject to conditions from HCC. And these are the detailed plans that we have for the new junction. So on the left here, you can see the new junction onto Harris Lane, which will have a give-way markings on the road. And then where the pavement terminates in front of number 52, this will be extended along to join up with the application site, and then the informal crossing will be here. So users of the site can cross Harris Lane and use the park, and vice versa, so that users of the park could come across and into the site to use the public open space in the site itself. This internal access road was also subject to vehicle tracking. I just wanted to pop that on there so you can see that the tracking was done to ensure that this junction was safe and manoeuvrable. So also in relation to highways, just to point out that there is common land along the highway verge in front of the site. As you can see in the green dotted area, it runs all the way along Harris Lane. So this is registered common land under the Commons Act 2006, and therefore the applicant will require consent to provide the new access road and that pavement that I showed you. This falls outside of the planning consenting regime. It's separate legislation. So once a planning consent is achieved, the applicant is then obligated to secure the necessary consents to do any work to that common land. So ordinarily we wouldn't need to control this, but in this case, the public right-of-way officer did copy us into some correspondence, and they suggested some conditions which we have attached. And this requires the applicant to, number one, secure those consents before they do any works whatsoever to the common land. And number two, they must provide a copy of that consent to both us and HCC before they carry out that work. So in terms of parking, the car parking on site is compliant with the parking standard SPD 2022. There are 5 visitor parking spaces proposed. That's these purple ones here and here. A scheme of this size would not ordinarily require visitor parking spaces in accordance with the SPD, but they've been proposed on this site. Cycle parking is also proposed with communal storage for the apartments and the masonettes, as shown. This elevation is the cycle store, which will be located here on the site, and that will accommodate 20 cycle spaces for the apartment buildings. And then an internal cycle store, which will be located here for the apartment buildings there. And the remaining plots were shown as having space for cycle storage in the rear gardens, but we've conditioned full details of the cycle parking for all of the plots. Trees and ecology, there are no TPO trees or veteran trees either within or adjacent to the site. The scheme does propose the removal of 3 individual trees and a 7.5 metre length of hedgerow. One of the trees to be removed is a dead tree. It's actually located outside of the site here. The other 2 are required to facilitate the site access and the visibility splays, which are necessary for highway safety. All other trees and hedgerow on the site will be retained, with some pruning and crown lifting proposed where necessary to implement the development or the boundary treatments. So a tree protection plan, as shown here, and a method statement have been approved by Place Services. And they've also requested conditions such as arboricultural supervision when these works are taking place, which have been attached. Ecology, 10% BNG is being secured with off-site interventions in combination with on-site. This has been acceptable to HCC Ecology, subject to conditions. There's a low to negligible potential for protected species on site. So in conclusion on the ecology, there's no significant conflict with the aims and objectives of the LNRS. So the site is at very low risk of fluvial flooding. It's at low to very low risk of surface water flooding. This map here is a surface water flooding map, so the site is located approximately here. So there are some small pockets of low risk. The LLFA were consulted and their objections have been resolved. So they've recommended some conditions which we've attached, and they're happy with the proposed drainage, including the suds basin, to the rear of the site. So other matters, air quality and contaminated land, no objections from environmental health, again subject to conditions. Climate change and sustainability, the scheme will achieve 64% regulated CO2 reduction, which is in excess of the 40% policy requirement. All dwellings will be fitted with air source heat pumps, as well as EV charging points, which is a building regulations requirement. There will also be optional PV panels for suitable dwellings. This is being secured in the Section 106. It's the same approach that was taken as the Shenley Grange scheme. So there's no objection from the Climate Change and Sustainability Officer. And in terms of refuse storage, this is also policy compliant. The collection arrangements are suitable. We have seen as well vehicle tracking to show that the refuse vehicles can turn within the site and exit in forward gear. So that brings us to the planning balance, again, referring back to paragraph 11D. So we first looked at DI, whether the application of policies in the framework that protect areas or assets of particular importance provide a strong reason for refusing the development. And we'll come to D2 next. So again, we have found that the scheme complies with paragraph 155 of the MPPF. This specifically states that development should not be regarded as inappropriate where it meets all of these requirements. And it's determined that the scheme does meet these requirements. It is grey belt, and this is consistent with the conclusions of the Harris Lane inspector and the Longview inspector. The development complies with these requirements and the golden rules, so it's not inappropriate in the green belt. So because it's not inappropriate in the green belt, we move on to 11D2, which says planning permission should be granted unless any adverse impacts of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the policies of the framework as a whole. So the planning balance has shown the delivery of market housing and affordable housing has been given substantial weight. This is entirely consistent with appeal decisions across the borough and indeed planning decisions that we have made. Housing is consistently given substantial or very substantial weight in light of the 0.98-year housing land supply and the ongoing need for housing in the borough. Compliance with the golden rules is given significant weight. This is mandated by the MPPF. The provision of public open space and contributions to the off-site open space improvements is given moderate weight. Similarly, the highways improvements, the net benefit to the broader community is also given moderate weight, together with the economic benefits of the scheme, which are set out in the update sheet. So in terms of harm, because the scheme is not inappropriate in the green belt, there's no green belt harm to be considered in the planning balance. So the harms are landscape impacts, which we have given significant weight, partial conflict with the Shenley Neighbourhood Design Code. Again, we've given moderate weight because this is only a partial conflict. And harm to neighbouring amenity, which we have given limited weight, as it's only a partial conflict with a SPD, which is guidance and not policy. So the view of officers is that the adverse impacts, the harms, would not significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits, and therefore the MPPF mandates that planning permission should be granted per paragraph 11. So I'll just finish on some CGIs which were provided by the applicant. This is the proposed development from Harris Lane. This is the public open space in the foreground at the rear of the site, looking up the hill towards Harris Lane. And finally, an aerial view of the development within its context. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we have speakers. So please listen for your name, come forward to the microphone, and it is the black button to speak. Can I please call Rachel Shaw to speak against the application? Thank you. I think actually Miss Shaw, sorry, I think you're supposed to sit up there where it says speaker. Thank you. Sorry. Thank you very much. Thank you. If you want to press the button, and you have 3 minutes. Thank you very much.
Councillors, I hope you've seen our leaflet detailing the harms, policy conflicts and undeliverable conditions arising from the excessive density of this scheme, which meets neither Greybelt PPG nor Greenbelt VSCs. The planning balance given is inconsistent with the 2023 appeal judgment, and applicant's counsel misleads when he quotes the inspector as saying a high-quality scheme could be realised. Well, he did, but he specified only at a lower density. This is higher. Nor did the inspector find the economic or highways benefits even moderately significant, or conclude that noise harm would be resolved, which it has not. The report double counts and uprates benefits and omits and downrates harms. This is not justified, and the Casey's representations are as unconvincing today as they were to the inspector in 2023. Nor is there compliance with the golden rules. 75% of the affordable housing is grouped in flats adjacent to a 110 decibel industrial wood chipper, not tenure blind, ethically acceptable, or the vision behind the legislation. The additional infrastructure proposed won't happen. The applicant doesn't control the land. The green space is poor quality and disconnected, in conflict with the Longview appeal judgment, as well as PPG. And the noise conditions are demonstrably undeliverable. So residents' amenity space will be subject to noise levels way above 7 decibels above background. It's also unclear that the scheme was even deliverable as submitted. The applicant does not have permission to access the site, which is over common land. You have seen the legal notice and, I'm sure, noted the lack of reassurance from the applicant's KC. Grampian conditions do not apply, and with over 200 metres affected, mandatory land in exchange would require a redesign. There's also a worrying lack of independent evidence to support the conclusions drawn throughout. Why has the officer discounted photographic evidence that Oak T14's route protection zone is in conflict with Plot 8, and evidence of unsatisfactory road safety methodology, as well as very substantial conflict with the neighbourhood plan? Councillors, Paragraph 10 of PPG on Greenbelt requires all proposals, including Greybelt, to be policy compliant and deliverable. This is not. And as a more dense scheme, otherwise materially unchanged, it cannot suddenly meet VSCs. Benefits have not been proven to clearly outweigh harms. So refusal on both green and Greybelt grounds is reasonable, and on behalf of all those who have objected, I ask you to do just that.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Hello. Thank you very much. Thank you. Can I call now Mr. Oliver Myrents Wilson? Thank you, sir. You will have 3 minutes as well to speak for the application. Thank you.
Chair, members, good evening. My name is Ollie Myrents Wilson, Land and Planning Director of Griggs Homes. The scheme before you is a high-quality, sustainable proposal with no technical objections. Officers have set that out clearly, so I will focus on the central point, Greybelt. Members will be aware that this site has a planning history, including the dismissal of a previous appeal. However, the planning context in which you've been asked to make your decision tonight is materially different from the context that applied at the time of those decisions. In recent months, members have been asked to consider several Greybelt proposals where the committee has felt there has been ambiguity, particularly around whether development would result in the merging of towns. Harris Lane does not present that ambiguity. In December, Longview, located 350 metres from this site, was allowed at appeal. In that decision, the inspector was clear that the land was Greybelt and the development was not inappropriate. The inspector determined that Longview did not strongly contribute to purposes A, B or D, as Shenley is not a large built-up area, or a historic town. This committee also approved Shenley Grange adjacent to Longview, and these conclusions are directly applicable here. Shenley is a village, not a town. At the previous Harris Lane appeal, the inspector concluded that the site did not strongly contribute to the relevant Greenbelt purposes for precisely that reason. The site is unequivocally Greybelt, and the proposals before you meet the golden rules in full. The inspector in the Longview appeal determined that the application complied with the golden rules. There is no basis for a different conclusion here. The scheme delivers 50% affordable housing in a mix agreed with the Hertsmere's housing team. It provides high quality on-site, publicly accessible open space alongside a contribution towards improvements at the Harris Lane playing fields. In addition, the development will secure contributions through SEAL and Section 106 of approximately £1 million, with the contributions higher than those secured at Longview, despite a lower number of dwellings. Members, this application is not about revisiting the past. It's about responding responsibly to the present reality, a new MPPF and a site that is unambiguously Greybelt and unquestionably complies with the golden rules. For those reasons, we respectfully ask you to support your officer's assessment and approve the application in line with the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. Can I now call Councillor Bright to speak? Thank you, sir. You will have 5...
Thank you very much indeed. Madam Chair, members, colleagues. Look, as a Hertsmere Borough Councillor and also as a Hertfordshire County Councillor for Shenley, I was asked to present views and concerns of local groups and residents, many of whom are here this evening, and it's a responsibility I take seriously, as I know you do when you are community advocates also. Before you, as you have heard, is an application that came before committee in almost identical form in 2022 and was subsequently dismissed at appeal in 2023. The current proposals raise many of the same concerns, particularly regarding the landscape impact and the rural setting of Shenley. I first highlight government planning practice guidance on the Green Belt, paragraph 10, which carries equal status alongside the National Planning Policy Framework. It makes clear that Grey Belt designation does not remove the requirement to comply with development plan and neighbourhood plan policies, the NPPF, PPG, the Golden Rules, or wider statutory and common law duties. There remain significant questions as to whether NPPF sections 155 and 6 have been fully met, and whether Hertsmere's core strategy, SPDs, SADMS policies have been consistently adhered to. The necessary infrastructure proposed is reliant on land outside the applicant's control and on funding not yet secured, raising genuine concerns around deliverability. Members may also wish to consider the proposed green space and whether it would truly meet community needs. Predicted noise levels from an industrial chipper, average speech is 60 to 7 decibels above ground, 85 for a lawnmower. We're talking about an industrial wood chipper. And this may raise clear amenity concerns, and the positioning of affordable housing closest to this noise source may also prompt you to reflect on design fairness and equitable living conditions. The weight afforded to the Shenley Neighbourhood Plan, which holds statutory status under NPPF clauses 12 and 14, is another matter deserving close attention. When assessed within a grey belt framework, wider policy compliance has still not yet been demonstrated. Let us turn to very special circumstances. The application does not present a sufficiently detailed or transparent evaluation. A robust assessment would normally identify harm to openness, landscape and character, analyse claimed benefits in detail, critically evaluate the applicant's evidence, and clearly demonstrate how benefits would outweigh harms. In comparison with other recent schemes, including tonight's postponed Allum Lane application, where extensive analysis was provided, the level of detail here is limited. The planning balance references sustainability policies, but whose footnote excludes green belt policies. And later statements assert that very special circumstances exist, but without fully evidencing how the harms are clearly outweighed. The last-minute update sheet waiting still does not fully address these gaps. Members may also wish to review statements regarding the inspector's previous findings. Paragraph 18 of the earlier appeal identifies substantial harm on the almost identical scheme. Within the current planning balance, some benefits appear to have been double counted or even given greater weight than previously supported, while certain harms, including conflict with the neighbourhood plan, appear reduced in weight without detailed explanation. As MPPF paragraph 153 makes clear, the responsibility rests with the applicant to demonstrate through clear evidence why inappropriate development should be approved and how harm is clearly outweighed by other considerations. Members are entitled to expect that level of evidence before approving an application. Members should also note Hertfordshire County Council's requirement for DEFRA consent relating to common land works prior to commencement. Such consent is a statutory requirement before access or works can begin and remains a material procedural consideration. Taken together, these policy concerns, the evidential gaps, deliverability uncertainties, inevitably affect the weight that you may choose to attach to aspects of officers' conclusions. You retain full discretion over planning weightings, provided your reasoning is rational and clearly explained. Under paragraph 10 of the Greenbelt PPG, non-compliance, even with grey belt context, remains a sound and defensible basis for refusal. And therefore, for all those reasons given above, and to those already given by the representative from Shenley, I respectfully ask for you to refuse this application on behalf of all those concerned by this application. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much. Officers, do you have any comments before I ask members?
No, thank you.
No. Okay. Members, do you have any comments to make and or questions for the officer? Councillor Quilty, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and please bear with me. I wasn't at the technical meeting, but I have been to this site on numerous occasions over the years, and well, outside the site, walking along the common land, and I'd like to ask a couple of questions. First of all, about that area, and I'll come back later on, maybe on more specific questions about the application as well. I mean, you mentioned that we know that there is what I would call a cordon sanitaire, if I could use that expression, those two words. The cordon sanitaire around Harris Lane, between Harris Lane, the highway, and this site. That's another word for a ransom strip, and it's common land ransom strip. And we were told that the officers told that the rights of way officer at Hertfordshire County Council did recommend 3 conditions. And I think in the report it said 2 were mentioned that were going to be attached to the conditions, and 1 was going to be mixed in amongst the construction sort of condition. Now, I couldn't see the 2 conditions within the 20 conditions that are here. I couldn't specifically see them anyway as separate individual conditions. Are they a Grampian condition, or what are they? I couldn't really read them myself personally. I didn't see them here, so I'm a bit, maybe they were left out, or maybe they were buried in somewhere else, I don't know. The other thing is, I'd like to ask, did the applicant serve notice when he was applying for planning that he was going to use common land? Did he apply to DEFRA that he was going to apply for use of common land in this application, because he is going over that common land? It's a technical point, but it should be addressed, and the officer should be aware as to whether or not they've applied for and given notice to DEFRA that they will be applying to use their land because part of the application we've got is the highways access and exit onto this site, and that of course is common land, so they should have applied for it. So I'm just asking, or they should have mentioned it to them. Anyway, there we are.
Thank you. So your first comments about the conditions, the common land conditions are covered, conditions 33 and 34. Yeah, and then one of the conditions related to some construction management requirements, which were inserted into the condition for the construction management plan, if I recall, just to avoid having two conditions that say almost the same thing. So that's how that's been conditioned. And then in terms of whether they've applied for the consent, it's something that comes after the planning permission process. So once the applicant has the planning consent, they then go to DEFRA with their plans and get that consent. It's not something that is necessary to be secured prior to a grant of planning permission.
Councillor Rosehill.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a bit of a broad question, really. I was just really wondering if we have anything local to judge grey belt on, or are we solely reliant on national policy? Because essentially, to me, the fact that we, I think, don't have anything means we've effectively created, this council created a very high-risk strategy of ceding its control of its green belt, essentially. So I was just wondering if there's anything local that we could use.
Excuse me, thank you. If you would let the officer answer the question. Thank you very much.
So when you say anything local, we have appeal decisions and we have other planning decisions. So the Longview appeal was made in the context of grey belt policy. The Shenley Grange planning application, also in Shenley, was made in the context of grey belt policy. There are no local policies around grey belt because it is a national policy. It's a national green belt policy. So the same way that you apply any other policy in the MPPF, you apply the grey belt policy.
Would we not adopt that somehow to protect ourselves? So that in light of the fact that, I know I'm being incredibly broad, in light of the fact that there are speculative applications, I'm just sort of setting myself, I've seen things in Solihull, for example, where they've actively looked at their policies to look at certain areas as towns rather than villages to protect themselves. So I'm just wondering if Hertsmere has done anything locally at all.
We have not done anything locally, no.
Thank you very much. Can I just remind members that it's absolutely fine to give broad comments, but if we could try and ask questions around the planning application that is in front of us, that would be very appreciated. Councillor Allen.
Thank you. Firstly, thank you. It's good to see lots of people here, and thanks for coming. This is a public and democratic process, and that's very important, I think. And thank you for all the emails that you've sent us, and all the points that you've raised. And many people went to a lot of effort to research these issues independently and provided us with lots of food for thought. So thanks for taking part in this process. That's really important to how it works. My two questions, firstly, are two things I can't quite resolve from what I've heard so far. The suggestion is made that what's proposed here is not tenure blind. That is the suggestion made. Georgia, could you give me a response on that? Because I'm not quite sure whether that suggestion is resolved or not. And the other question, and Seamus did ask about it, but I'm still not quite sure I understand it, is it's also suggested that the infrastructure benefits can't be delivered because of land which is outside the control of the applicant. I don't feel I've got to the bottom of either of those two, and those are my questions for now.
Thank you. So the market and affordable homes are spread across the site. There are some in the apartment buildings on the northern boundary. There are also market homes on the northern boundary. There are also affordable homes on the boundary with Anderson Road. The dwellings across the site are designed with the same level of quality. They all have access to the same amenity space, parking, cycle. There's no there's no lack of quality from our office's perspective. So the 10.
Could we see the graphic of that again? Because you did have a graphic which spelled that out. The suggestion is that the affordable homes are in the worst bits of the site.
Apologies, bear with me a second. There's a lot of slides. Yeah, so here you can see a number of affordable units. So that's two units, probably easy if I do this. That's 2 units here, 3 units here. These are affordable. And then you've got the apartments in these 2 blocks, and then you've got 2 units here. As I say, the design quality of all of the buildings is the same high quality, the same materiality, the same finish. All of the residents of this development will have access to the public open space, the same benefits that anyone else living on this site would have. So it's officers' perspective that it's tenure blind. That's our professional advice to members.
Where on the graphic is the very noisy wood chipper?
To be honest with you, I don't know where that is. This is the Griswood and Tom's site. This is the car park. Where the chipper is located on the site, I could not tell you.
But it might be that the unit on the top, which isn't one of the affordable ones, it might be that that's actually nearer to it.
This one here?
Yes.
These are market homes.
Yeah. So they... Okay, to try to get to the bottom of that. And then the other point about the suggestion of the undeliverability of the infrastructure or BNG aspects.
Yes, so the infrastructure. The only infrastructure that the only land that the applicant doesn't have control over, I assume would be the park. So the financial contributions would be for Shenley Parish Council, who, as I understand it, they have plans to improve the park and playing fields through a new pavilion, improved footpaths, new playing fields. So that money would be for them to use for those improvements. However they see fit, it would be ring-fenced for that in the Section 106. Otherwise, the only other infrastructure would be the crossing over Harris Lane, which would be that would need to be secured with highways. But otherwise, the infrastructure is being secured in the same way that any other infrastructure would be on any other site.
So why is it suggested then? I just don't understand, not sure I quite get the point. Why is it suggested that the infrastructure improvement is outside their control? Because it's in the park? Because it's in the Harris Lane recreation ground? Is that the basics of it?
I don't know who said that the infrastructure is not deliverable. It's certainly not officers.
Okay.
Councillor Morris.
Thank you. A few points of clarity, please. I know that there is a letter that has been sent to many of us, if not all of us, and I know I drew it to Liz's attention just before this meeting, that was sent back in December of last year. And I'm trying to understand what explanation we have as to how this may be addressed, because it's obviously a fairly serious letter from a lawyer who's representing the community. So that would be my first point. My second point relates to Council's report. Normally, or on the majority of occasions, we receive a detailed report from the Council's report. We seem on this occasion to have received what one might describe as an abridged report, and I'd like to know why we haven't seen the full report, because we can't challenge or give justification one way or the other without sight of that. And then finally, for the moment, my question relates to noise, insofar as what I don't understand is how we control noise if it is found to be unacceptable. We've heard a lot of noise about it, but we haven't actually heard how it would be addressed if there is an issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Morris. I'll respond in relation to the letter that you referred to from Knights in relation to the strip of common land fronting the site, and if permission were to be granted, over which consent would be required from the Secretary of State for that development to be implemented. And as you heard earlier, the officers are in fact recommending 2 conditions, and they are, to answer Councillor Quilty's earlier question more clearly, they are Grampian in nature. The inference or the thrust of the letter from Knights is that it would be first and unlawful for you to grant planning permission. I fundamentally disagree with that. It wouldn't. At the end of the day, the developer is taking a risk, because if he doesn't get permission on this site, then he won't be able to implement it. Our usual position on a Grampian condition is that it can be imposed unless it's an impossibility that the third-party land could come into under the ownership and control of the applicant, and it clearly is not an impossibility, because statute conceives of the ability, and it's referred to in the letter from Knights, of applicants to apply to the Secretary of State to have the designation of the land changed, in which case it could be utilised for the purposes for which the developer would intend and which he would need to implement this permission were it to be granted. There's a reference made to Section 45 of the Commons. It's the Commons Act 2006, actually, not the Commons Registration Act. But that is simply the power of a local authority, including this council and or Shenley Parish Council, to assert rights over unowned common land. So that tells us, first of all, that there's no known owner of this land. And that is to prevent encroachment, and encroachment would be an offence. So Shenley Parish Council do have the right to continue to protect that strip unless and until the Secretary of State gives a permission for that designation of that land to change. Now, it is normally the position, usually, in fact, and that's a concession also made in this letter, because it is usually the position that the Secretary of State will require exchange land, but it is not settled policy that will always be the case. And in the event, it's not for us to judge whether we think the Secretary of State would or wouldn't. We all thought at Woodcock Hill recently that the Secretary of State wouldn't give consent to a village green to be developed in return for exchange land, but he did. And the injections that we helped fund for Elstree and Bournemouth Town Council were unsuccessful. So it isn't our job tonight to second guess what the Secretary of State might do. It's to engage with the material planning considerations on this application and determine whether it is or isn't grey belt. If you don't agree with that, what other grounds in terms of it being green belt would you consider might warrant permission or refusal? Thank you.
There were 3 parts to the question, so I think there's more to come. So I will come to you in a minute, sir.
Yes, to go back to your other 2 questions. So the comments that we sought from Council, we sent the report, and the report was read and reviewed, and comments were received on the report. We didn't receive a publishable note as such, which is what the applicant received from their council. So we did provide you with the applicant's council note, but we didn't commission a note as such. So as noted in the update sheet, that feedback was received to us via email, and we've passed that feedback on to you. So in terms of the noise, this was something that was obviously relevant at the appeal. The noise on this site was an issue, and it was dealt with during the appeal with the applicant's noise specialists and environmental health here at the council. And in the course of the appeal, they agreed a condition, and they agreed that the wording of that condition would secure appropriate and noise-compliant living conditions for future residents of the site. So that was not a factor in the 2022 appeal decision. It wasn't a reason for refusal. It wasn't in the planning balance. It was resolved, it was mitigated. So when this planning application came through, obviously the applicant had that in mind, and they've designed the scheme to be able to comply with that condition, to be able to comply with appropriate noise levels internally and externally. that noise environment has been a driving factor for the design of the scheme. The placement of habitable room windows, the proposed acoustic fence along the northern boundary. This was all considered as part of the design of the scheme to ensure that the living conditions would be appropriate and would be compliant. And our environmental health officer is satisfied that that's the case, subject to the conditions, which will ensure that this all happens in the proper way, and that ultimately the living conditions in the properties will be adequate. And that includes with things like opening windows. So, for example, the condition says if when you open your window, the noise levels are too high, then you have to have an internal ventilation system, which means that you can have fresh air in your property without having to open your windows if the noise levels are too high. So it's all covered in the conditions. It was all under scrutiny by environmental health, and is ultimately resolved and mitigated as part of the assessment of the scheme.
Yes, go on. If you have a supplementary,
Yes, I'm sorry, just need to carry on. Is really addressing both questions. The second part of that question that you've just answered related to the fact that if it did not meet the required standard and the properties were still having unacceptable noise levels, what actions can this council take or the residents take to address it? That was number one. And number two relates to the council's report, and I don't quite understand why, if the applicant was able to provide a detailed council's report, we as a council couldn't do exactly the same, and we can only be provided with what I would describe as a somewhat edited version, and some might argue that it's edited of convenience. So I'd just like to understand why one side can and the other side can't. Thank you.
So, in assessing the scheme, environmental health would have been looking at whether fundamentally the scheme can be made acceptable through appropriate acoustic design, such as the location, the acoustic fence, and all the other mitigation. If on the technical information that they reviewed, they felt that it wasn't possible, they would have raised an objection, and that would have been an issue, that would have been a reason for refusal. They would not have recommended conditions because it's fundamentally not going to work. So they were satisfied that it was going to work and that subject to those conditions, it could be made acceptable. In that context, it's highly unlikely that you're going to get a noise environment that's resulting in noise complaints. If that did happen, it would be down to environmental health to deal with that scenario. Just going back to the question about the wood chipper, it has been identified. I can confirm that it is approximately 101 metres away from the site boundary and that it's within an open-sided barn. So obviously, in carrying out their noise impact assessment, the applicant would have measured all of those noise levels, and that would have been considered by environmental health. In terms of the barrister comments, this is just the legal advice that was asked for by our legal team and what we received back. I didn't instruct our counsel. We received feedback that the assessment was sound. We didn't feel it was necessary to have that in a publishable format. In this case, I can only assume.
Thank you. Councillor Gray.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And quite a few of my questions have actually been answered by previous members of this committee, by Councillor Harvey Patterson a few moments ago. I was going to allude, actually, I do remember going on a site tour of Gristwood and Tom's for a previous application many years ago. And Georgia, you are right, it does sit in a barn, probably a little bit further set back on that third kind of open space there, which, if I was to take an educated guess, I'd say the affordable units are further away from the market value units, actually, in that regard. Look, I often hear members in this committee talking about the grey belt issue, and we need to kind of test it in law. We need to look further up and down for case law that's been proven. Well, look, we have two examples of that here. We have an inspector who ruled on a site being grey belt 350 metres down the road from where this site sits. So I'm very comfortable with the grey belt assessment. that has been made on this application.
Thank you. Councillor Rosehill.
Thank you. Just a quick one. I heard when the applicant's speech, there was a very vociferous Shenley is a village. So I just wanted to know what the population of Shenley was and what that would normally be classified as.
Bear with us just a moment. I would say in regards to Shenley being a village, okay, so approximately 5,391 residents. If you look anywhere in any of our policies, in our SADM, in our hierarchy of settlements, Shenley is always categorised as a village. It's never been considered a town.
Councillor Lambert.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm just trying to collect my thoughts. I've got three main areas that I want to ask questions about and receive the comments back from the planners. The first one is about noise and where it emanates from. I'm just really surprised that in the presentation we get pictures of noise reduction fencing, and yet we do not know where the noise is emanating from the Gristwood and Toms location or operation there. And I think one needs to be armed with that sort of information because I've got a feeling that it might just be very near the affordable units, and I'm not sure how comfortable I feel about that. That's first one, and perhaps planners would like to comment on that, but I could go on to my second point. I just want to clarify for my own mind, the original application was turned down by this planning committee as not having sufficient special circumstances for development in the Greenbelt, and I'm not terribly surprised at that. And then the inspector dismissed the appeal, and therefore this is coming back, which is the same location, the same sort of layout of houses, and is relying entirely on it being grey belt rather than green belt. Have I got that right? And I have real difficulty in being able to see that something like this suddenly becomes grey belt. Grey belt needs to be tested, and I don't think we can suddenly say this is grey belt. So I'd like the planner's comments on that. My third point is one that I'm going to have real difficulty overcoming. We have got this stretch of common land between the highway and this plot, and we've put in a couple of conditions which don't seem to me to be very strong, and we also have a solicitor's letter which has been barely mentioned. It's only because it's been sent to us, saying that they will be going for judicial review if we pass it. Now, I think if we passed this and we prompt a judicial review, that would be very silly. We think planning inspectors are quite expensive. Going to the High Court to challenge a judicial review can be very much more expensive. And we will be complicit because we've already been warned. My detailed question in relation to that is, we say that this can be quite easily changed, but who changes it? Who allows it? Particularly if there is local opposition, who can say you can have this common land and it can become effectively under a developer's remit? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Patterson is going to answer some of your questions, I believe, and then...
Well, I'm sorry, Councillor Lambert, if you may have missed some of what I said earlier, or if I didn't make myself clear enough. For the avoidance of doubt, and I'm a solicitor too, incidentally, the fact of the matter is, this letter invites you to not consider this application, to refuse it, to say that you can't grant it, not on the planning merits, but because there is a strip of common land in front of it. And that is fundamentally wrong. The fact of the matter is, it cannot be implemented if you do grant permission until a consent is granted under the Commons Act. And that is a developer risk. The condition, the granting condition couldn't be, it's not unambiguous, and it's perfectly workable. It says the development won't commence until that consent is granted. So, and if it did commence, this council, you mentioned injunctions earlier, if it did commence, this council would get an injunction. This council could serve a stop notice. So that condition is perfectly enforceable and deals adequately with the legitimate concerns over this common strip. It in the end is a matter for the Secretary of State to decide whether he will or he won't. It's a matter of risk for the developer. It's a matter for you to disregard that and have regard to this application and its suitability in terms of our planning policy. I don't see this as a reason. Oh, can I just say, judicial review, yes, of course it's expensive, and it's expensive to the applicant, and it would be expensive to us. But nonetheless, the council, planning is an area where we are judicially reviewed from time to time, and we have the means and resources to deal with that. And we would deal with that in the usual way. We'd take council's advice on it. If we thought it was weak, we'd oppose it at the permission stage. And that would be subject to council's opinion at the time. That would be our approach. In the end, I think fear of litigation and cost shouldn't be a concern.
Okay, to come back to your other questions. So you queried where precisely the noise is coming from. If you'll bear with me a second, I'll pull up Google Earth. So this is the application site here. The wood chipper is in this barn here, which, as I understand it, is where the vast majority of the noise is coming from. So you've got dwellings along here, both market and affordable homes, and this is approximately 100 metres odd, 101 metres. This is obviously quite dense vegetation. There will also be an acoustic fence. An acoustic fence is not just any old timber fence, it's a 2.4 metre fence designed to prevent noise from coming onto the site. So that, I hope, is helpful to answer your question. And then you also mentioned the original planning application, which was refused on there being no VSCs, and the inspector dismissed that appeal. This application has to be assessed against the policy framework that we have now, which does include, when we're looking at whether or not it's inappropriate development, at that time, we looked at all of the criteria and found that it didn't comply with any of those exceptions, such as being PDL, etc. So the 2024 MPPF introduced another way that development could be not inappropriate. We have to take that into consideration. We have to consider first whether or not it complies with that. So is it grey belt? If so, does it comply with the golden rules, etc.? We have to apply that to any development in the green belt. It doesn't mean that just because it's grey belt or not inappropriate, that's it, you go ahead and get your permission. Obviously, we have to apply the rest of the development plan, the rest of the national policies. It just means that the principle of development is different now. So in officer's view, yes, it's grey belt, and it's not inappropriate because, as I went through the steps, it complies with all of those requirements. And then we look at the rest of the scheme, we look at the rest of the policies, and we arrive at the planning balance. So the planning balance is fundamentally different if we're at a starting point of it being not inappropriate, and that wasn't the case before. So it's a different planning assessment, essentially, that arises.
Councillor, thank you. Councillor Brisky.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I took the liberty of reading the appeal report from the planning inspector over the weekend. and therefore I do accept the officer's case that the site does not make any contributions to purposes A, B or D to the green belt, and therefore would meet the Labour government's grey belt policy. Whether or not this complies with the golden rules or not, I've heard arguments for and against so far. I've not made my mind up yet fully, but we shall see how the debate continues to unfold and how I make my mind up on that. But what I see in front of us here is a site on the outskirts of Shenley Village, forming part of that crucial transition between rural and village, the countryside and the idyllic English village. What I see on that slide is suburban density development. Therefore, even if it is grey belt, we still need to ensure that we are compliant with all other relevant planning policies. So over the weekend, I also took the liberty of reading the Shenley Neighbourhood Plan. And policy number 1 within that plan, it talks about preserving the rural character of Shenley. 24 pages of the plan are dedicated to this. And what I find here is that this proposal conflicts with both the letter and the spirit of that plan. As I said, this is suburban density development in a village, and we have evidence here showing that this is higher density than all surrounding roads. And, you know, in her report, I saw the officer discussed the block of flats within the development. I can't remember if it was on the slides, but I did pay close attention to this in the report, figure 10 on page 150. And the officer says that, you know, it started off being pretty unsympathetic to the rural character of Shenley, but then as a result of pre-application discussions with the applicant, we've arrived at something that is least possibly bad. But, Madam Chair, unfortunately, that still involves harm to the character here, which I understand has been taken into the planning balance. But I see direct conflict with the Shenley Neighbourhood Plan, because ultimately when we are trying to build at this kind of density, when we are building flats at the edge of a village, there is going to be harm. So I turn back to the...
Do you have a question?
No, I'm going to make some comments, as I have every right to do as a member of this committee. And
Okay, I didn't say you didn't have the right to comment. I'm merely asking if you have a question.
Well, the answer is no, but I will continue, if I may.
Fine, thank you. If you could get to a question, that would be nice, because other people would like to speak. Thank you.
Madam Chair, as I said, I do not have a question, but I would like to make some comments, see if the officer would like to comment on what I have to say. So I turn back to the inspector's report. And if the officer could kindly go to the planning balance slide, please. Yes, please. You see, the reason we have a planning committee is because the officer makes a professional judgment on the weighting attached to each material planning consideration, but as long as it's reasonable, the committee has every right to disagree. So, the delivery of market housing, it is said there that, and market and affordable housing are both substantial weight. In the inspector's report, he noted that we had a shortfall in terms of our housing land supply. It was still much lower than 5 years, and he gave that significant weight, not substantial weight. So the planning balance starts to tilt for both of those items. And then we have moderate weight for the conflict with the Shenley Neighbourhood Design Code. Madam Chair, as I've just said, I find pretty significant conflict with the Shenley Neighbourhood Plan, and therefore I'm going to increase the amount of weight that I attribute to that. So, for me, the planning balance is starting to tilt in favour of refusal, but might not be there yet. So I'm going to listen very carefully to the rest of the debate and decide how I intend to vote.
Thank you very much. Councillor Graham. I'm sorry, pardon me. there may well have been a question in amongst your statement.
Just to come back on the point of density, I would draw your attention to the remainder of Shenley, both Anderson Road and Newcombe Road, just a short distance to the southwest, and the densities of the surrounding village compared to the application site. It's certainly not our view, it's not officers' view, that the proposed density is unacceptable or out of character with the surrounding area. So I got a bit more information on the density. So the proposed density on the site, 23 units per hectare. And the neighbouring development on Anderson Road and Newcombe Road is 28 units per hectare. So it's actually higher density than the application site. Up to 43 units per hectare along New Road. So it's officers would not agree that the scheme is unacceptably high density. Just as well, to come back on the point that you made about the weighting for the housing, this was made clear in the committee report, the reason why officers have come to the judgment that they have, and our advice to members as to why housing should be given substantial weight instead of significant weight. Our housing land supply has gone down since that appeal decision was made. Our housing need has gone up. The consents that have been secured within the neighbourhood plan area, only one of which has been implemented, and it's this weighting, the weighting that officers have given and that's shown in this slide, is entirely consistent with appeal decisions and other planning judgments both in Shenley and elsewhere in the borough. So this is deemed to be proportionate and rational, and that's officers' advice, professional advice to members.
Thank you. Councillor Graham. Sorry, Graham Alexander. Councillor Alexander. Do you know, it's been a long day. I do apologise.
It's okay,
for getting people's names
makes that
wrong.
mistake.
Councillor Alexander, thank you.
I've been called a lot worse things, so that's okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, sir. Sorry.
I've got a couple of questions, if I may. The first one is about compliance with the neighbourhood plan as a whole. So the report at 7.105 recognises that there is some conflict with codes SC1, SC4 and SC5. So, yeah, I'm not sure if there is a concept of some conflict. I mean, in the way I see it, either there's a conflict or there's not. So if there's a conflict, there's a conflict. And then how can you say, if there is a conflict with those three elements of the code, how can you then go on to say that the scheme is considered to be compliant with the neighbourhood plan as a whole? So it's clearly conflicting with some of it. How can you say then it's compliant with the whole thing? That's my first question. And the second question is about the planning balance, because I think ultimately that's what it's going to come down to tonight. If we were to accept, let's say, that it's grey belt and it's therefore not per se inappropriate development, but we've still got to make this planning balance. So that's what it's all going to come down to. And I do think we need to drill down a little bit into this a bit more. So, you know, there's benefits, there's harms that have been assessed there, but how do you ultimately conclude that the benefits outweigh the harm? So, for example, you might say landscape impacts significant, and indeed, you know, we had 700 and odd objections, so clearly the residents are giving a lot of weight to the landscape impacts. They're clearly giving less weight to delivery of market housing. I think also it's fair to say that previous inspectors also gave less weight to that, albeit it was in a different epoch, but nonetheless, they did give less weight to that because of the quantity of affordable housing. So ultimately, the question I'm trying to ask is, how do you assess, therefore, that the harm is not outweighed and not significantly outweighed by the benefits?
So in terms of the Shenley neighbourhood plan, so the assessment has looked at the plan as a whole, and it's determined that it's compliant with policy SH1. As I say, it's the advice of officers that the scheme is an appropriate density, an appropriate design. It does respect the rural character of the area. That's our conclusions on the assessment. the conflicts that were identified with the design code. So you've got the code and you've got a set of 7 or 8 codes, and you find that it's compliant with all but 3. So yes, there is some areas of non-compliance, but in terms of the thrust of the Shenley Neighbourhood Plan as a whole, that area of non-compliance in the context of the entire plan was not considered to therefore be a complete and utter failure to comply with the Shenley Neighbourhood Plan, because the scheme has clearly had regard to the requirements and the aspirations of the design code in terms of the materials, the landscaping, the site layout. So this is why officers have arrived at that conclusion. In terms of the planning balance, so where we are now, the wording of the policy, it states that the adverse impacts of the scheme would have to significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. So it's your interpretation of significantly and demonstrably. So the benefits, as we've set out here, the substantial weight both to market and affordable housing, significant weight to the golden rules, as we have to give it significant weight. And then the remainder is essentially officer judgment. Compared to the harms, you don't have one harm there that is considered to carry substantial weight. And it's not a mathematical exercise, as we've said many times at committee. It's about applying your planning judgment, applying common sense, and reading the policy and taking the policy at its word. Do those harms significantly and demonstrably outweigh those benefits? That's the judgment that you make as a decision maker.
Thank you. Councillor Gray.
Yes, thank you, Chair. There's not really much more to say on this. I think we've put to bed some of the major issues that we've come across in terms of the ransom strip of land. I hear what Harvey Patterson has said to us and the legal advice that we've received. And to my mind, while we may have to give it some weighting in our decisions, it's a developer problem and not a planning problem. It certainly doesn't stop us agreeing or actually accepting the planning application. Ultimately, if they can't resolve that issue, they can't build it out, and that's the risk that they run as developers. In terms of the weighting and the plan balance, I feel we've got that quite spot on, actually, with regards to this development. This development is less dense than the surrounding areas. I'd love to know what the density of this committee has gone to in recent months, but I imagine it's gone very, very high. And for those reasons, I'm going to propose that we accept officer's recommendation and go to the vote on this.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Allen wished to speak. Or actually, thank you. Does anyone wish to second? Councillor Smith? Yes, thank you. So I'm going to allow Councillor Allen to ask his question, and then I will propose that we go to the vote. Thank you.
Thank you. As mentioned, we do appreciate all the emails and the questions and points that are brought to us. We take them seriously. But one of the things that was mentioned in some of the campaign material is that we make the final decision, if only we don't, because any decision we make, if we refuse, can be overturned by the planning inspector, and that has to form a very important part of our considerations in determining this. But my question is about the grey belt, green belt definition. And for me, what makes this quite a lot different from, for example, Shenley Hill and Bushy Hall Golf Club is that the Purpose A argument it does feel very convincing from officers here. And it is very difficult to argue against that finding on Purpose A, particularly because just north of the site is the industrial operation that causes the noise, and there's quite a lot of hard standing and built form at Gristwood and Toms, which is just the other side of it, and beyond that is a road. So I do find it impossible to disagree with officers' findings on Purpose A there. But just as one final check, could you go back, Georgia, to that slide that you showed when you were showing where the wood chipper is? If you happen to know this, the last houses on Harris Lane, which stick out a bit from the rest of the built form, how many metres is the development, if this is built, from the last existing Harris Lane house to Griswold and Toms. What length of Harris Lane will be developed, which is not developed now? The gap. What's the gap? What does it measure?
The gap between...
Do you see what I mean?
Yes, I do. Sorry, bear with me.
From the last house that is there now.
This house?
Yeah.
To where?
To the beginning of the hard standing of the...
The beginning of the hard standing. Here?
Yeah, because that's essentially the greenbelt quantum, isn't it?
69.6 metres, according to Google.
Right, so what's at stake here is 60 metres. Yeah, okay.
Thank you very much. I think we can go to the vote. So Councillor Gray proposed to accept the officer's recommendation. Councillor Smith, I believe, seconded. So if we could now give our opinion. Thank you very much, members.
Thank you, members. We're moving to the vote, and that will include the conditions in relation to the protection of the common land fronting the site. I'm going to call out your names in turn. I'm going to ask you whether you vote for, against, or wish to abstain on the proposition. Thank you very much. Councillor Alexander?
Sorry, you mentioned something about conditions now. What are we voting on exactly?
No, we're Sorry to interrupt. Councillor Gray proposed that we accept officers' recommendations subject to all the conditions that have been laid out. Yeah. So you're saying yes or no to that.
Okay, so I'm voting against.
Thank you, sir.
Councillor Allen?
For.
Councillor Brisky?
Against.
Councillor Gray?
For.
Councillor Handley?
For.
Councillor Carza?
For.
Councillor Lambert?
Against.
Councillor Morris?
Sorry, against.
Thank you. Councillor Quilty? Yes. Councillor Richards?
For.
Councillor Rosehill?
Against.
Councillor Smith?
For.
Chair?
For.
That's carried 7 votes to 6. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much, members of the public, for coming. I go to item 6, which is the planning appeals. Can everyone confirm they've received their list of planning appeals?
Agreed, Chair.
Thank you. Item 7 is any other business, which there is none. And so item 8 is the date of the next meeting, which is the 19th of March. Thank you very much. I close the meeting at 7:57. Thank you.
How did you manage that?
What?
Closing at 7:57. It's unheard of.